When a team that's struggling to reach playoffs for years buys a $10 million a year player, they expect him to carry the whole team on his shoulders to the Stanley Cup Finals. But as you might have guessed, this isn't always the case. Here are the worst contracts in the 2023 season. Sergey Bobrovsky. Sergey Bobrovsky has had a remarkable career. He is one of only a few goalies to have won 2 Vezina trophies, and he helped take several mediocre Columbus Blue Jackets teams to the playoffs. He had some tremendous meltdowns during the playoffs. He signed a large 7-year, $70 million contract with the Panthers in free agency 4 years ago and was meant to address their goaltending problem. But he has not done so, and his postseason difficulties have continued. Bobrovsky's 2021-22 season was a good comeback season, especially because he was able to beat out top prospect Spencer Knight for the team's starting goalkeeper job. But when your goalie has a $10 million contract hit per year, that goalie better be a season changer. Bobrovsky was that player in Columbus at one point. However, he hasn't been that player in a long time, and he's now 34 years old with 4 years left on his current contract. Drew Doughty. This would have been unthinkable 5 or 6 years ago when Drew Doughty was one of the league's best all-round defenders and a key member of a consistent Stanley Cup contender. However, he has slowed significantly in recent years and is no longer an $11 million per year athlete. He did rebound this season, helping to stabilize a youthful Kings defense before getting injured, but he is a shell of the player he was at his peak. He still has 5 years left on his contract, and the Kings need him to keep performing at the level he did last season to make the deal at least partially worthwhile. Jamie Benn. The Stars have a few alternatives here, with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin both making over $9 million per year despite no longer being top-line players. Even though Sagan's contract is longer, he is still a better player than Benn, who has 3 years left on his contract and contributes $9.5 million to the cap. His output has significantly fallen in recent years, with him falling from a scoring champion a few years ago to a 20-goal, 50-point player presently. It's difficult to criticize the Stars for signing Benn to this contract at the time, but it hasn't aged well. Seth Jones. Let's begin with this. This season, Seth Jones was not nearly as horrible as his most vocal detractors would have you believe. He was good and accomplished a lot. However, this contract and the trade that sent him to Chicago was a miscalculated move by a team that lacked vision and had no idea what it was doing. He is one of the league's highest-paid defenders, with a $9.5 million cap hit per season for the next 8 years, and he's not performing at that level. It's even more irritating for Chicago because the team moved Alex DeBrincat this offseason because it didn't want to pay him a lot of money to be a part of a rebuilding team in the future. To acquire Jones from Columbus, Chicago also handed up a slew of draft picks and young players, which has cost the organization. Jeff Skinner. Jeff Skinner and Jack Eichel appear to be the team's 1-2 punch for the next decade when they initially came to Buffalo. The Sabres signed him to a long-term contract with a $9 million budget cost per season after he scored 40 goals in his debut year with the team. His skills subsequently plummeted to just 21 goals over the next 2 years, and Eichel's relationship with the team quickly deteriorated, leading to his trade to the Vegas Golden Knights this year. Nobody expected anything to go as planned, but Skinner did rebound a little this season, scoring 33 goals, but he's looking more like a utility player than a star. Marc-Edouard Vlasic. Marc-Edouard Vlasic was a key member of the Sharks' core and one of the league's most underappreciated defenders at his peak. He assisted them in remaining a constant competitor and reaching the 2015-2016 Stanley Cup Final. But time is unbeatable and has recently caught up with Vlasic. He also carries a $7 million cap hit for the next 4 years. This is a team in serious need of a rebuild, with some questionable contracts for elderly players like Vlasic and Erik Karlsson on the roster. Some may argue that Karlsson's cap charge of $11.5 million per year is a worse deal, but I believe he's a better player than Vlasic at this stage and can produce at a reasonable level while providing some offense. Darnell Nurse. This is a case when you enjoy the player but despise the deal. Darnell Nurse is a good defenseman and perhaps Edmonton's best, but the Oilers overpaid him with a $9.25 million salary cap charge on an 8-year deal. He had a great year during the 56-game 2020-2021 season and rewarded himself with a mega contract that made him one of the league's highest-paid defenders. Is he, though, the type of defenseman on whom a Stanley Cup contender can count to play 25 minutes in every situation at a high level? I'm still not convinced. On that style of club, he is definitely better suited to be a number 2 type defenseman. Given how much they pay Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, the Oilers must exercise caution in how they spend lower down their lineup, and this is the type of minor overspend that may build up. Rasmus Ristolainen. Rasmus Ristolainen has been one of the league's least productive defensemen for the majority of his career, but the Flyers were ready to overlook that when they traded a first-round pick for him. They were also willing to look beyond it again when they re-signed him to a 5-year, $25.5 million contract extension, including in his first year with the Flyers. It makes even less sense when you consider the Flyers' current roster. On paper, this is one of the league's worst rosters, and this is a team that should be rebuilding rather than dealing first-round selections for veteran defenders. The Flyers were unable to make a substantial free agent or off-season acquisition due in large part to a lack of salary cap space or the opportunity to trade some contracts. Contracts like Ristolainen's prohibited them from making substantial roster improvements. Philipp Grubauer. When the Kraken assembled its inaugural roster, it was evident that it intended to construct it from the ground up. They spent a lot of money on Philipp Grubauer and Chris Driedger to be their franchise goalies, but they turned out to be the team's worst weakness and helped wreck their first season. Grubauer was coming off an excellent season with Colorado when he signed in Seattle, but that was one of the league's most goalie-friendly environments. The Avalanche possessed the greatest defense in the league, a dynamic attack that could provide a ton of offensive assistance, and all of its goalies have performed at a comparable high level in recent years. When Grubauer played for an expansion squad, things changed drastically. He had one of his worst seasons with the Kraken, and there's no guarantee he'll bounce back. He's signed for 5 more years with a cap hit of $5.9 million per season. That's a significant investment in someone who's not been a consistent top-tier starting goalie. Unlike your investment in our channel by subscribing, our content is always top-notch. Ryan Johansson. The Predators expected Ryan Johansson to be their number 1 center and paid him accordingly when they re-sent, which is roughly half of what he shot this season. Regression is to be expected this season, and that contract is once again a source of concern. Nashville clearly sees it as an issue since the Predators left him unprotected in the Seattle expansion draft, along with Matt Duchene, in the hopes that the Kraken would pick him up. They did not do so. Jacob Trouba. The Rangers named Jacob Trouba captain this offseason, and he is well liked in New York for his rugged play, but this is not one of their better contracts. He counts for $8 million against the salary limit for the next 4 years, and may be the team's second or third best defenseman, depending on how highly you regard K'Andre Miller. The Rangers are facing a surprise salary cap crisis and have had to say goodbye to a lot of valuable depth players this summer, including Frank Vatrano, Ryan Strome, and Andrew Kopp. They could have undoubtedly found better uses for the $8 million Trouba is counting against the cap. Benn. The Red Wings started the summer with a large amount of salary cap room and a strong desire to accelerate their rebuild. They used a lot of that cap space, and they used it well. The one significant miss might be Ben Sherratt's 4-year contract, which has a $4.75 million cap charge per season. This type of free agent contract will almost surely result in a salary-retained trade, a buyout, or waivers. Sherratt is a sought-after player, as seen by clubs dealing considerable assets for him and signing him to large contracts, but his teams consistently perform worse when he is on the ice than when he is not. That is a source of concern. If you're interested in watching more teams waste their money, I recommend clicking the video on the screen to know about the most overrated players in the 2023 season.